The last time I saw my neighbor, she was standing in her window. I almost didn't notice her. It was late, past 2 a.m., and I was just about to go to bed when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I live in a small suburban neighborhood, the kind where the houses are just far enough apart that you don't really know your neighbors. But her house? It was directly across from mine. At first, I thought she was looking at me. But then I realized she wasn't looking at anything at all. She was just standing there, facing the glass, her eyes too wide, her hands pressed against the window pane. I frowned. Something about her posture felt off. Like she wasn't supposed to be there. Like she wasn't in control of her own body. A shiver crawled down my spine. I grabbed my phone and turned off my bedroom light, stepping closer to my window for a better look. She still hadn't moved. Her face was pale, her lips slightly parted, her hair a tangled mess around her shoulders. Was she sleepwalking? I thought about waking my parents, but that felt stupid. What was I supposed to say? Hey, our neighbor is standing in her window like a freak. Should we call someone? Then, she blinked. Slow, deliberate. But her eyes didn't change. I felt my stomach drop. I reached for my phone, hesitating before texting my mom, who was asleep down the hall. Me, do you think Mrs. Dawson is okay? A minute passed. Then another. Finally, Mom, what are you talking about? I glanced back at the window, and my heart stopped. Mrs. Dawson was gone. The window was empty. A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. I stared for a few more seconds, waiting to see if she'd come back. Maybe she had just walked away. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. Then, just as I was about to close my blinds, her porch light flicked on. The front door creaked open. I held my breath. A shadow moved in the doorway. Then, slowly, too slowly, Mrs. Dawson stepped outside. I squinted. Her arms hung limply at her sides. Her head was tilted at a strange angle, like her neck couldn't quite support her weight. Then, she started walking toward my house. I stumbled back from the window, my pulse slamming against my ribs. No, 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 no. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I tried to type. Me. Mom, Mrs. Dawson is coming to our house. Nothing. I ran to her room, bursting through the door. She sat up immediately, eyes squinting in the dark. What's wrong? I didn't get a chance to answer, because that's when we heard it. The doorbell. My mom froze, her expression shifting from sleepy confusion to cold fear. She grabbed her phone and checked the security camera. Her face drained of color. What the hell? She whispered. I leaned over her shoulder, my stomach twisting. On the porch, standing perfectly still, was Mrs. Dawson. Her face was too pale, her clothes hanging off her like they didn't quite fit her body anymore. And her eyes, they were just wrong. Too dark, too empty, like something had hollowed her out from the inside. She didn't blink. She didn't even move. She just stood there, waiting. Mom's voice was tight. Did you see her come over? I nodded, swallowing hard. She exhaled sharply. Okay, we're not answering the door. I expected her to call 911, to call Mr. Dawson at the very least. Instead, she just sat there, staring at the screen. I could tell she was afraid to move. The minutes crawled by. Mrs. Dawson didn't leave. She just stood there. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Don't let her in. My body turned ice cold. I looked at my mom. Did you just text me? She shook her head, her hands clenched into fists. I checked the cameras again. Mrs. Dawson was closer now, standing right against the door, her forehead almost pressed to the wood. Then, in a single, jerky motion, she lifted her hand and started scratching. Not knocking, not ringing the bell, just scratching. Slow, rhythmic. The sound made my stomach churn. S-E-R-R-R-C-H. 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 Jesus Christ, my mom whispered. What is she doing? I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. Then, Mrs. Dawson stopped. She tilted her head, like she was listening to something we couldn't hear. Then, in one slow, sickening movement, she bent backward. Her spine arched unnaturally, her body folding in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Then, she crawled off the porch. Not walked. Crawled. Like a spider, her limbs moving wrong, her joints clicking with every step. Then she disappeared, just vanished into the dark. We didn't sleep after that. My mom stayed up, watching the cameras until sunrise. When we checked the footage the next morning, it wasn't there. Everything had recorded perfectly, except from 2:17 a.m. to 3:02 a.m. It was just static, like nothing had happened at all, like Mrs. Dawson had never been there. That afternoon, We saw Mr. Dawson outside. He was loading boxes into his car. He looked pale, like he hadn't slept in days. Mom hesitated before calling out, "Everything okay?" He paused. Then, in a quiet voice, "My wife passed away 3 days ago." I felt my whole body go numb. Mr. Dawson gave us a tired smile. "She went peacefully." Then he got in his car and drove away. We never saw him again. That night, I had a nightmare. I was standing at my bedroom window, and in the reflection, right behind me, Mrs. Dawson was smiling. The first time I saw him, I thought he was a reflection. I was home alone, my parents out of town for the weekend. It wasn't a big deal. I was 18, used to having the house to myself, and honestly, I enjoyed the peace. That night, around 1 a.m., I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I noticed something off in the mirror. In my reflection, just behind me, near the doorway, there was a man standing in the hallway. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked my toothbrush out of my mouth. The hallway was empty. Heart pounding, I turned back to the mirror. Nothing. I exhaled, trying to calm myself. Just my imagination. Just late-night paranoia. I finished up, turned off the lights, and went to my room. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something real. Something that had been watching me. By 3 a.m., I still wasn't asleep. I kept checking my phone, scrolling through meaningless posts, trying to distract myself. Then, a sound. A soft, deliberate tap. I froze, my fingers hovering over the screen. The tap came again. It was coming from my closet. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I turned my head. The closet door was open an inch, just enough for the darkness inside to feel deeper, more suffocating. I swallowed hard. Did I leave it open? I sat up in bed, my body tense. The house was silent, except for the distant hum of the fridge downstairs. Then, a whisper. Low, too low to make out the words. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the closet door, and slammed it shut, shoving my dresser against it for good measure. My heart was pounding so hard it made my head ache. I sat on the edge of my bed, waiting. Nothing. No more sounds. No movement. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was just on edge from earlier. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, my ears straining for any noise. I must have dozed off because when I woke up, it was morning, and the closet door was wide open again. The dresser? Still pushed against it. I barely breathed as I got up and grabbed my phone. My fingers were shaking as I called my friend, Tyler. "Dude," I whispered. "I think someone was in my house last night." Tyler laughed. "You serious? You sure you didn't dream it?" I stared at the open closet. "I didn't dream it." Tyler sighed. "All right, I'll come over." By the time he got there, the sun was high. The fear from the night before feeling almost ridiculous. Almost. We checked the whole house. Every room, every door, every lock. Nothing was out of place. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. "See?" Tyler smirked. "Just your imagination." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, guess so." That night, I made sure everything was locked. I pushed a chair against the closet door just in case. Then, at 3:12 a.m., I woke up. To breathing. Deep. Slow. Too close. I didn't move. Didn't even blink. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something standing in the darkness, just out of sight. My phone was under my pillow. I reached for it as slowly as possible, trying not to make a sound. The breathing stopped. I held my breath, waiting, my fingers trembling as they touched the screen. Then, a whisper, right next to my ear. "I moved the chair for you." I threw myself out of bed, my phone tumbling to the floor as I sprinted out of the room, my pulse hammering in my ears. I ran downstairs, not stopping until I reached the front door. I yanked it open and ran into the yard, the cold night air burning my lungs. The house behind me stood silent. Too silent. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and called Tyler. "Get over here. Now." 15 minutes later, his car screeched into my driveway. I ran to meet him, my whole body still shaking. "Jesus, dude," he said, stepping out. "You look like you saw a ghost." I didn't answer. I just pointed at the house. Tyler sighed. rubbing his face. "All right, let's check it out." We went inside together. Everything was normal. The locks were still in place. The windows were still shut. And my bedroom? The chair was still against the closet door, exactly where I left it. Tyler gave me a look. "Man, I think you need some sleep." I wanted to argue, wanted to scream that I wasn't crazy. But what was the point? There was nothing there. Except, when I picked my phone up from the floor, there was a new photo in my gallery. My stomach turned to ice. The picture was of me sleeping, taken from inside the closet. I left that house the next day, moved in with my sister for a while. I never stayed there alone again, and I never opened that closet again, either. Because sometimes, when I pass by the old house, I see something through my old bedroom window. A shape, tall, motionless, standing inside. And I know, it's still waiting for me to come back. It was supposed to be a normal night. My parents were out of town for the weekend, and I had the house to myself. I wasn't nervous. I had stayed home alone plenty of times before. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people trusted their neighbors and left their doors unlocked during the day. I had plans to binge-watch horror movies, eat junk food, and fall asleep on the couch. But that night, something felt different. At first, it was little things. The way the house seemed too quiet after dark. The way the wind rattled the windows, making the shadows move just slightly out of the corner of my eye. By 11 p.m., I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone, half watching some slasher movie I'd seen 100 times before. Then the motion sensor lights in the backyard turned on. I looked up. The floodlight illuminated the yard, casting long shadows against the trees. Nothing was there. I frowned and got up to check the back door. It was locked, just like I had left it. I peered through the glass, my breath fogging up the surface. The yard was still. Just the wind, I told myself. I sat back down, pushing the uneasy feeling away. Then, at 11:38 p.m., the doorbell rang. I jumped. My stomach twisted. Who would be ringing the doorbell this late? I grabbed my phone and pulled up the front porch camera feed. It took a second to load. The screen was grainy in the dim light, but when it cleared, there was a man standing on my porch. He was tall, wearing a hooded jacket, his hands shoved into his pockets. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the door. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering. He didn't ring the bell again, didn't knock, just stood there, watching. I turned off the TV and sat completely still, barely breathing. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Are you home?" A wave of cold fear crashed over me. I looked at the porch camera again. The man hadn't moved. I swallowed hard, my fingers shaking as I typed back. "Who is this?" No response. I reached for the house phone, ready to call the police. Then, the man took a step closer. I dropped the phone. He was right against the door now, his face still hidden under the hood. Then he tilted his head, like he could hear me. My body locked up. I forced myself to reach for my phone again and dialed 911. The operator picked up immediately. 911. "What's your emergency?" I kept my voice low. "There's a man on my porch." He rang the doorbell, but he won't leave. The operator's tone shifted. "Is he trying to get inside?" I stared at the screen. The man hadn't moved. "Not yet," I whispered. The operator stayed on the line, asking me questions about my address, if the doors were locked, if I was alone. Then, the man stepped back. He turned, slowly, and walked down the driveway. Then he disappeared into the darkness. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "He's gone," I whispered. The operator still sent an officer to check the area. They arrived about 15 minutes later, flashing lights bouncing off the houses. By the time I opened the door, my legs were still shaking. The officer, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes, took my statement and checked the camera footage. Then he frowned. "You said he rang the doorbell?" I nodded. The officer looked at me, confused. "Your camera never recorded a sound." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked. He rewound the footage, letting me watch. The man was standing there, but there was no audio of the doorbell ringing. Nothing. Like he had just appeared on my porch. The officer stayed for another 30 minutes, patrolling the neighborhood before finally leaving. I locked every door and window, triple-checked the alarms, and tried to sleep. But then, at 2:47 a.m., I woke up to a tap on my window. Soft, deliberate. I sat up, my heart hammering. Another tap. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers and pulled up the backyard camera. It loaded slowly, freezing for a second before clearing. My blood ran cold. The man was standing in my backyard, right below my window. His hood was still up, but now, he was grinning, and he was holding something. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. You didn't answer the door. A choked gasp escaped my lips. He knew I was awake. I scrambled out of bed, rushing toward my parents' room and locking myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911 again. The dispatcher picked up instantly. I could barely form words. He's back. He's in my backyard. He's watching me. The dispatcher stayed on the line, telling me officers were already on their way. I didn't look out the window. I couldn't. When the police arrived, their flashlights swept the yard. But the man was gone. No footprints in the grass. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. Like he had never been there. The officers stayed for over an hour, making sure the area was clear before they left. By sunrise, I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, I had imagined the whole thing. Until I checked my phone. One more text from the unknown number. A picture, taken from outside my bedroom window, of me sleeping. I moved out of that house a month later. I changed my number, deleted my social media, but sometimes, late at night, I hear tapping on my window. Soft, deliberate, and I know, deep down, he's still looking for me. I never liked being home alone at night. I don't know if it was because of all the horror movies I watched growing up, or the way the house felt different when it was too quiet. But something about being alone after dark always made me uneasy. It was worse when it rained. The sound of heavy raindrops against the windows, the distant rumble of thunder. It made the house feel isolated, like I was the only person left in the world. That night, I was house-sitting for my uncle and aunt while they were away on vacation. It wasn't my first time staying over, but it was my first time being there overnight alone. They had a huge, old house in a rural part of Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the nearest neighbor was a 10-minute drive away. They left around noon, reminding me to lock up before bed and keep an eye on the security cameras. The system was old but reliable. 5 cameras, 1 for the driveway, 2 on the porch, 1 in the backyard, and 1 near the basement door. The first few hours were uneventful. I made dinner, watched some TV, and FaceTimed my best friend Leah for a while. Then the power flickered. Not out completely, just a brief surge, the lights dimming for half a second before returning to normal. I glanced at the windows. The storm was getting worse. I hate that house, Leah muttered through the phone. It's creepy. It's not creepy, I lied, trying to ignore the way my skin prickled. Leah raised an eyebrow. Your uncle literally told us last year that the house is over 100 years old and was used as a makeshift hospital during the war. That's creepy. I rolled my eyes. It's just old. She shrugged. If you say so. Just don't get murdered. Wow. Thanks. We laughed, but the unease lingered. I ended the call around 11 p.m., double-checking that all the doors were locked before heading to my room for the night. Then, at 12:27 a.m., the security system buzzed. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Motion detected. Backyard camera. I grabbed my phone, opening the live feed. The screen loaded slowly, too slowly. The signal was weak because of the storm. When it finally cleared, the camera showed nothing. The backyard was empty, just rain pouring down in thick sheets. The wind rustled the trees, making the shadows shift, but there was no movement. I let out a shaky breath, probably just the wind. I turned off the phone and tried to go back to sleep. Then, at 12:46 a.m., the system buzzed again. Motion detected. Basement door camera. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. I reached for my phone, but this time, the camera feed wouldn't load at all. A network error message flashed on the screen. I swallowed hard, listening. The house was dead silent. No wind, no rain, just silence. I slipped out of bed, my pulse roaring in my ears. I crept toward the hallway, avoiding the spots where the old wooden floor creaked. The basement door was at the end of the hall. I reached it and listened. Nothing. I exhaled. I was freaking myself out over nothing. Just as I turned away, the door handle moved. I froze. Not a mistake. Not my imagination. The handle twisted, slowly, deliberately. Someone was on the other side. My body reacted before my brain did. I lunged forward and locked the deadbolt, shoving my weight against the door. A soft tap came from the other side. Not a knock. A tap, like someone was testing the wood. Then, a whisper, so soft I almost didn't hear it. Let me in. I ran. I sprinted back to my room, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, dialing 911. The call wouldn't go through. No service. No Wi-Fi. A deep, sickening dread filled my chest. Then the security system buzzed again. Motion detected. Front porch camera. My heart stopped. I clicked on the feed, the screen taking forever to load. When it did, someone was standing on the porch. A man, but his face was wrong. His mouth was too wide. His eyes too dark, like he was a badly made mannequin. He just stood there, staring directly into the camera, not moving, not blinking, just waiting. The wind howled outside. The house creaked, and then the screen glitched. The image froze, his face distorting into a blur of static. Then, black. The security system went offline. I nearly dropped the phone. My breathing came fast and ragged. Then I heard it. The front door creaked open. A single, slow step echoed through the house. I backed into the closet, pressing a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Another step, then another. Slow, deliberate. He was inside. I curled into the corner of the closet, shaking violently, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The footsteps stopped outside my room. The door handle turned, locked. A long, heavy silence followed. Then, a whisper. I know you're awake. I bit down on my knuckles so hard I tasted blood. The doorknob rattled violently, like something was furious it couldn't get in. Then, silence. For minutes. Maybe hours. I don't remember when I passed out, but when I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. The house was silent again. I hesitated before opening the closet door, my legs stiff from staying curled up for so long. My bedroom door was still locked. The basement door was still locked. But the front door? It was wide open. I ran outside, my lungs burning with panic. The yard was undisturbed, the rain from the storm leaving everything slick and untouched. No footprints. No signs of a break-in. Nothing. Like no one had been there at all. But I knew better. I never stayed in that house alone again. And sometimes, late at night, when my apartment is quiet and I start to drift off to sleep, I hear a tap on my window. Light. Deliberate. Like someone is testing the glass. Waiting.
Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing.